Welcome, everybody, to this month's Lunch and Learn with Terry and Jay. We are going to be talking about sales and marketing and the application to behavioral elements. So, Terry, the first thing that I want to ask you is how do you respond when somebody says, I don't do sales? Is that something that you've heard before?
That's oh man. When in the early days of speaking, I used to say, all right, raise your hand if you're in sales, right? And you'd be in a room with a bunch of business owners and professionals, and like 10 of them would raise their hand and 20 of them would keep their hand down and like, "Eh, you're all in sales. Get this straight right now, man. Even if you're, in the receptionist role at the front office, right? Director of first impressions, it's selling. Maybe if you're in the accounting space, you can get away with saying you're not in sales. If you are the accountant of a publicly traded company and all you do is push buttons and track numbers. Aside from that, man, IT, you're selling on what projects you need, human resource, you're selling people on who to hire. Sales, turns out you're in sales. Business owner, you should be the number one sales guy in your company. Marketing, you're selling. You're all in sales, people, all of you.
Yeah,
That's how I think.
absolutely. And I find it interesting because oftentimes when somebody says, no, 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 I'm not a salesperson, I'm like, are you trying to sell me on the fact that you're not a salesperson? And they're like, wait a second. So, sales obviously has a huge impact with influence. And a lot of times when we think about sales, it's really about being influential. And, from the behavioral element side of things, most people look and they say, okay, well, sales is obviously the fire element, right? Like goals, results, get it done, which can be true. We do see higher levels of fire in a lot of our salespeople. But remember, just because you're high in something doesn't mean that you're good at it. Just because you're low doesn't mean you're bad at it. It's really about how we approach it. So, Terry, you're not a fire, but you've been a solopreneur for years. You're a collaborator, you're an influencer, you build networks. What is your approach as an air element? And, what's your approach or how do you look at sales?
My water is really pretty high as well. So I think it's important to note that the ability to do relationship selling is relevant and important. But for me, man, I've always looked at it is if I can help you solve a problem, right, we're gonna do business. And so, long before even reading sales books on consultative sales and digging in and understanding the situation and the problem and the implications, right? To steal from Neil Rackham in his fabulous sales book, Spin Selling. That was always my approach. And what frustrated me from a sales perspective is I did such a great job of gathering information that by the time I'd walk out of a sales appointment, I'd have three or four referrals for different people in my network and totally forget that, I came in there to sell some stuff for me too, or to solve some problems. And that was always last because yeah, as you mentioned, fire's third place for me. So it's balanced, but not high.
Well, and I love what you said there because the way that you even framed that from the very onset told me exactly what I would want to know from a behavioral element style of your sales style. You help people solve problems, which is the people and the solving problems, the water and the air stacked on top of each other. And I just find it interesting because one of the things that I've seen is some sales teams really kind of cater to that smile and dial, hit the phones, give the calls, hardcore out there selling, which really is not going to appeal to all of the different elements. And it's particularly not going to appeal to somebody who maybe is a water element that needs to do sales as well, or that needs to have some influence. So let me stick with that for just a moment, Terry. As you're talking about helping people solve problems, when you're approaching a sales conversation, what's maybe one of the first things that goes through your head as an air and a water? I mean, did you have some of the anxiety around sales when you started? Was it something where it was like a mindset for you? What did that look like?
All right, so you're gonna hop me and put me in the Wayback Machine, right? Because first start been a second. I don't know if you can tell. It's a rough 28 years so far. Um, it's I didn't
I figured you were around 28 years old, so that makes
28,
sense to me.
20, 29, 28, somewhere in there. For me, it was almost a foregone conclusion, right? And so, if you think back to when we were growing up, the misnomer was, oh, you can talk to anybody. You'd be exceptional in sales, right? And so that's the stuff that I had heard my entire life. And real sales professionals realize that the more you talk, the more likely you are to lose sales. So the idea that talking to anybody is a good sales tactic or is a prescription for selling is wild. But in the early days, I would have a little bit of apprehension about whether it was getting on the phone or wearing out the shoe leather because I worked in some spots where it was not uncommon to have to go pull on 50 doors to try and earn business, right? And it's always been a numbers game. The more people you talk to that happen to be at the right time in the right place, that's where sales came from back then. There were no drip campaigns. You want a drip campaign, you got to go walk through that building again, man. There were some more cards around. So yeah, the apprehension was a little bit, but until I figured out that it was supposed to be fun, right? Listen, this is you're doing them a service. You're going to go in and help some people. And if you can pull that off and make some people smile along the way, that's how you're going to spend the day, man.
Something you said, and I'm going to latch onto that because I think that that is something when people do experience some of that anxiety about sales, a lot of people have a difficult time asking for stuff or asking for money or, setting their price or any of those types of things. But I think one of the things that you said is something that either came pretty natural to me, but it is something that I try to coach people on is your product is a value proposition to somebody. And if you think about the value of your product, whatever it is, whether it's a service, whether it's a widget, whether it's a gadget, whether it's a technology, that you are using that to help somebody solve a problem or solve a need, it kind of changes the game a little. You're not asking them for a donation or money or just something for nothing. You're giving them value. And when we think about sort of reframing our brain, for me as a fire element, sales always really it just came naturally. But I've been in positions where so I'm going to share. I'll take you in the Wayback Machine. 22-year-old Jay Johnson got signed up somehow or another into one of those multi-level marketings where you could be selling products and so on and so forth. I lasted exactly 1 week. And I, maybe not for the reason that you would think, I immediately realized I was good at this. I was going to be able to sell a ton of their products. But then all of a sudden I realized, do I really want to be selling these products? Do I feel good about these products? There were like garbage, sugary energy drinks and overpriced cereal and whatever else. I'm like, I'm selling I didn't feel good about that, so I actually quit. I lost my investment into the thing and so on and so forth. But it is one of those things where when you believe in your product, when you know your product is providing a value, it makes it where you can ethically feel like you are delivering a value proposition, not asking for money. And I think that that was a game changer for me.
It's 100%, right? And that's why it's so important to align to the things that you're actually doing, at least from my perspective, right? Because if I can walk in and feel like I'm gonna be adding value to you, and it's a disservice to you and others if I don't make the calls or knock on the doors or send the emails, that's for me, that's enough to put a little fire under my butt. Right. That's going to motivate me into action because, like, I've said it before when we're talking, I'm a helper monkey, man. And if I'm not positioning myself to help as many people as possible, I'm doing a disservice to them which ultimately I need to remind myself that it's a disservice to me too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm looking at the chat here and I see Heinz sales, ABC, always be closing question mark, listen, listen, listen. And here's something that I love that Heinz because the listen, listen, listen is exactly where I believe behavioral elements can really help us to be able to position our sales messaging differently. If we're listening for what is driving somebody's behavior, so let me give a quick example of this. If you're an air element, driven to learn, driven to experience new things, new challenges, new ideas, if I'm selling something to an air element, I'm going to be thinking about how can I create the language around this is going to be a unique experience, a growth opportunity. You're going to transform. It's going to be something really powerful. If I'm taking that same product and I'm selling it to somebody who's a fire, they're going to want direct. They're going to want to know how it's going to get them results. This is how this is going to elevate you to the next level. This is going to accelerate your acquisition. This is going to help you make money. This is going to help you be prestigious or whatever that is. So in shifting and listening, we're going to be able to hear what it is that's really kind of motivating that person. And if we think about like behavioral elements as a larger thing, in looking at, okay, we know that nurses, for example, tend to have a very strong drive to bond. So, how can I position a message towards drive to bond if that happens to be my buyer persona or my target demographic? So, I'm going to ask you a question here, Terry. Do you do like when you're thinking about your buyer personas or when you're thinking about like sales from that behavioral standpoint? How are you maybe thinking and positioning your message to access some of those different elements?
So I think about that stuff all the time, which is part of the reason I was so excited to find you, right? Is like if your message doesn't resonate with your intended audience, they're never going to hear it. And this is true if we're talking a broad stroke, aerial coverage social media marketing. And it's true if we're like one to one doing hand to hand combat, me sitting across the table from you. And so understanding where someone comes from, and you did such a cool job of it earlier that, you're like, oh, you just told me exactly who you are. Problem solver, help people, right? This is it. And I think if we do a better job of listening to Heinz's point in the chat, right, we can actually start to understand who people are and then more importantly be able to meet them where they are. And so I think that's a necessity all day long, right? That's how we move people into action, by speaking in a language that they understand, not just the language we know to communicate.
Yeah, and I think that goes along exactly with what Sarah had just said in the chat. What's in it for me, right? Like that's when we buy stuff. Just think of the person that's buying, or even how about this audience? Here's my question for you: what is the last thing that you purchased? Maybe, and it could be food, it could be this, it could be that. Maybe make it something where it's not like you spent a penny at the store or whatever, but the last thing that you purchased. And if you really start to think about like what motivated you to make that purpose, was it something new, experiential? Did you travel? Did you go somewhere? Did you try out a new book or something of that nature? Was it a security based thing? Did you create stability or a process, something to organize you, something to get you more systematic in our earth element? Was it something to help you acquire resources? Was it a brand purchase that was sort of elevated? Was it something that got you ahead of the game or an advantage? Or was it something that connected you with people and friends? Was it something that you could throw a beautiful party, or was it something that you could utilize to create a better relationship with somebody? Was it a gift for somebody? If we really think about our purchases, they generally fall very neatly into those four different categories, which are the behavioral elements. So
That's
very blue paint. That's funny.
it's absolutely true, man.
So
Absolutely true. No, I
yeah,
love that. And I think that's such an important piece of context, right? And again, going back to speaking that right language, not everybody is going to jump right into the boat when you ask them to, but they're going to get a lot closer to the shore if they feel like you understand what their challenges are and are going to provide a reasonable solution, right? A lot of times we're talking about from a sales and marketing perspective, it used to be it was 7 touches before someone might take any action. They're showing now, HubSpot and the like, that people need to hear about you or see you or think of you like 32 times in a month, right? It's so ridiculous because it's so noisy out there. So the more you're able to dot your intended audience right between the eyes, the more it's going to actually relate to them. So understanding these motivators or what drives people's behavior becomes really relevant.
Well, and I think about that in terms of, yeah, like, let's even think about this. I choose a particular brand or item. What is it that brought me to brand A versus brand B? Maybe it's buying a car. Did I go out and I buy a Tesla? Did I go out and I buy a Ford F-150? Did I go out and I buy a BMW? Like, what is the rationale behind there? And oftentimes we can look at the motivations or the underlying drives that help us to better understand. Okay, maybe I bought a minivan and I am, I'm a family person and I'm thinking about the safety and the security features and so on and so forth. And that's what's important to me versus I went and bought a Maserati because I like fast. I like this. I like being out there, being recognized. So when we're thinking about even the motivations behind why we choose a particular brand or an identity, oftentimes it's those drives that are going to have an influence on those choices. So, Terry, if you are, and let's talk about this in terms of we are the salespeople, okay? Because this is something that I saw, and I'll give an example of this. There was at one point in time, worked with the company. The CEO was a fire element, and interestingly enough, they were the only fire element in the entirety of the organization. They come flying in their quarterly meeting and they're like, listen, team, we got to get out there. We're going to sell, sell, sell. This is going to be our biggest quarter ever. And woo, let's go. And it was their worst sales quarter to that point of their company. It literally alienated every single one of their people, which, come to find out after we did the assessment, were all water and earth elements. So the CEO came in super passionate, super, let's get out there, let's sell, let's sell, let's sell, given that rah rah, sis boom ba, and then all of a sudden just everybody backed off, right? If we are in those sales positions, how would you be coaching a team, or what would be some things that you would think about to coach a team to say, all right, let's tap into this water, let's tap into this earth, let's tap into this air, let's tap into this fire?
So I like the idea of really kind of digging into understanding what drives them and then positioning them to get the desired outcomes that they're looking for. And the challenges with sales and with leadership is so often we try to take this one size fits all approach. And that's not how it works, man. I know you've been talking about how training, like I'm the trainer. I'm probably an air guy, maybe a water guy, and I'm going to throw some training out and it's going to relate to everybody and they're all going to want to consume it, right? It's the same thing, man. We have to, and good Lord, if I say meet people where they are in this episode or this show one more time, but it's such an important element, man. And so to really go into like if I had an earth salesperson, um, gosh, I would really, really want to make sure that the products we are selling has some level of stability, some level of protection. If I'm selling security or selling insurance, having an earth person probably makes some sense, right? But if I'm selling like Maseratis, Like I gotta move you into a different role, man. There's nothing that would make sense about you selling Maseratis as an earth person in my head. Am I wrong about that? Does that make sense to you?
I mean, you could. So if I was helping a Maserati salesperson who is an Earth, I would give
Yeah.
them right, like, and this is maybe one of the things to think about is whatever element you are in the audience. What's important to you is one aspect, but what's important to everybody else is going to be a different aspect. So that Earth salesperson, what I'm going to do is have them have a process, and I'm going to literally map out the process. This is what you do first. This is what you do second. This is what you do third. Do not get into the technical because the person coming in to buy the Maserati is probably not looking at anything other than how much horsepower, what's the speed. They're not going to be really concerned about all of the safety features. So please don't go into detail about all the safety features. Your job is going to be to get them to this point in your process as quickly as possible. And if I think you set them up with a process to say, this is who you're selling to, this is what they want, and this is how you're going to check the boxes as you go down, that's going to give them, as a salesperson, the security, the reliability of repeatable results. Then, if it doesn't go well, if they're not selling well, we need to tweak the system. We need to change the system of selling or the approach to selling. So it would be more important for me to tell them, don't get bogged down in the details because your customer probably doesn't care about the details. They want to know how fast it goes, how it sounds, and they want to know how quickly they can get this off the lot and what price you're going to be selling it. Those are your main focal points. But giving them a structured process is going to help them have an advantage. If that person was a water element, I would be helping that water element to say, okay, yeah, you got to create that connection and bond. But at the same time, this is not going to be a consensus. The person sitting across from you is probably not going to be looking for consensus. They're going to be looking for how quickly can I do this? What price can I get it at? So helping them to navigate, yes, build trust. And I want to comment on Francesca's comment in there because that's so important. Help them build trust, but then help them get to the finish line quickly because sometimes that decision, or they'll want to talk, or they'll want to make sure that they're very comfortable. The person sitting across from you may not necessarily need all that. They want this, and whether or not they've already made the decision of whether or not they're going to buy. So, but Francesca's comments I think is really important, and this is where we can tie some of this back too. She says, as she's predominantly a fire, secondary influence of water. When you receive a sales call and you feel like you're a dollar sign rather than a human being, or that there's a relationship there, I want to bring to the attention of the audience 50, if we take all 40,000 ish assessments that we have at this point in time, 50% of the general population is driven by water, the drive to bond first, then air and fire at about 20% each, and then earth at about 10%. Okay. So that relationship is exceptionally important, especially when you know you're dealing with half of the world or half of the general population. You got to be building that relationship. That doesn't mean you have to do it slow, but it does mean that you do have to spend some time making sure that trust, rapport, and good communication is occurring inside of that sales game. What do you say about that, Terry?
I think it's so important to do that, but to also know how much of it you need to do, right? So to go back to our training the Earth guy how to sell Maseratis example, which I think you did a great job of saying, really what's important is need to know how to relate to this type of people and this type of people and the people who aren't you. And in the reality is in a Maserati, you might find an air driving a Maserati. You're never going to find an earth guy driving a Maserati. You're unlikely to find a water person that was interested. But fire all day, man. That is a fiery ride. Again, I'm talking coupe, convertible, right? Hot red, flaming down the road. Um, and so understanding how to relate to them is really important. And they don't want a bunch of chit chat. They don't want a bunch of bonding. They want to know that you know what the heck you're doing and are going to get them on the way straight away. And I think that's important.
I want to jump in there too, because, and let's think about it this way. When you're in sales, your goal is not to sell to everybody, right? Your goal is to sell to your target market, your target persona. There is a specific niche of people that are going to want that particular product, service, or whatever it is. And I think a lot of times salespeople get kind of lost in saying, I've got to have a message that applies to everybody. And when you get more focused, that doesn't mean, so maybe there is a water out there that's like, oh, I love the Maserati. My dad had one and I definitely want one. That's great, but that's not your target. That's not the person that is most likely to buy your product. And if you're spending time on that one person, you're probably not spending enough time on your actual buyer personas. So that's going to be one of the takeaways I want you to really think about as the audience is who's the actual person that really needs, wants, or values what you have to sell. What is their element? What is their lead? And if you really focus your energy and attention on that, I mean, there's 7 billion people in this world. I guarantee there is a lot of people that want what you have, want what you need, and you need to be spending more of your time and energy on them than you do on the rest. If the rest come to your message, fantastic. That's awesome. That's icing on the cake, but really spend your energy on your target people, on your target buyer personas. So let's talk. We talked a little bit about earth in sales. We talked a little bit about air in sales. Let's get to water though, because I think a lot of waters really struggle with that sort of making the ask or getting somebody to say, because it almost feels like that transactional aspect of it can feel really uncomfortable when it's more focused on the relational aspect of it. So how might you coach some water elements to sort of overcome some of that internal barrier that they have in order to say, okay, I've got to sell, I've got to build those relationships, but at some point in time, I do have to ask for the money or ask for the sale. How would you get there, Terry?
So, it's interesting because one of the things that I think this does is it really helps us hold a mirror up to people so we can see who we are and also understand the gaps from where we want to be. And I think most people that are water, and I find it interesting that water is certainly the number one group of takers of this assessment. I think most people that are water have some level of awareness of what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. They feel to me, as a watery person, a little more fluid, a little more go with the flow, a little more dialed into, Mother Earth and the whatnot. And I think that's where that overall bonding, caring, observation, ability to create harmony and mediate other conversations because I think they're a little more dialed in. Again, maybe I'm just channeling my air through my water, but I think that's a big part of it. And
to
so
go to go off of that, Sarah's comment in the chat literally just kind of fits with that. As a water, I'm great at telling you all the great things, but I can't close. Right. So
yeah.
yeah, I think you're spot on there. So keep going, Terry. What do you got?
Right. So we're like super dialed in and super concerned and super caring. And so I think pointing all those things out is important. And then reminding folks that all that conversation that you've built up, all that rapport ends up going away if you just give them all the information, but don't actually secure them as a client. And there are times when people who are buying things just want to be asked, just for the dang principle of the fact that you have to ask for the sale, excuse me. I know people that are CEOs that are like, "Oh, I would have totally done business with them, but they didn't ask for it." Right? So just out of a principle piece of it. And so reminding people that asking is a part of getting what we want, teaching them how to ask, teaching them when to ask, teaching them what that ask looks like, reminding them that, again, it is a disservice if they don't ask, if they truly believe that this will solve the problem. And then, there's going to be a little part of the whole opposite of that is like, What's stopping you from asking? Why are you not having those conversations? And you said that this was the right fit for them, so make it the right fit for them. And I'm in this exact situation right now, and you already know because I've got this client that said, "Hey, we're going to get started in June," and it's July 9th, and I don't remember us starting yet. So I've got to push through some of this stuff in my own life as we speak.
Well, and so here's two things, and Sarah, I'm gonna address that challenge for you, and I'm gonna maybe give you a tactic to push it. Okay. First, I think as a water element, a lot of the salespeople that have been water elements that I've worked with, one of the things, and whether they say it out loud or whether it's really just internally reflected, there is an element of I don't want to cause a challenge for the person. I don't want rejection. I don't want to ask and then be told no and then feel like the relationship's lost trust or that there's something there. And that I think can be a big barrier in order to essentially making that ask. Because it's almost like now I'm finally asking you, we've been dating and we've been doing all of this, but now I'm asking you to marry me and let's see where this goes. Right. So that rejection can come at a huge cost. But here's the way that I would suggest, Sarah. Think about it this way: if you don't ask, someone else will. And that other person that will may not have that person's best interest in their heart, may not be as good of a fit, may not solve their problem as well as you, didn't spend the time to get to know them, and maybe doesn't care as much. And I know that maybe they do, maybe they don't, but put in your mind that if you don't ask, someone else is going to, and they're not going to care as much as you do. And if you frame it that way, it's going to have a different feel to it. It's like, I have an obligation, almost like what you said, Terry. I have an obligation to ask. I spent all this
Sure.
time, this energy, this effort in getting to know you, getting to build trust, liking you, appreciating you. It's my obligation to now say, let's close this deal. Let's make this official. Let's move forward. We obviously are enjoying each other's relationship, communication. I have your best interest in mind. I feel like you have mine. Let's solidify this. Okay. Because if you don't, somebody else is going to take your prom date to the prom and you're going to be left, you're going to be left standing on the sideline. So reframe that. You have an obligation to it because you care, not that, not that the relationship's going to be damaged because you care too much. Thoughts on that, Terry?
I think you said what I was trying to say better, right? And that's really what I meant was, listen, you're gonna end up losing out on all of this goodwill, all this opportunity, all of this hot light in your face if you don't actually, cement the deal. And you're doing them a disservice, right? And with water in particular, to say you're doing you a disservice, they'll be like, "Oh, it's okay. I'll come up with another one eventually." Um, but when you say you're doing them a disservice, right? That puts a real nice little top on the nail right there.
Yeah. So, and I did see Francesca has some excellent recommendations in there, and the three sales strategies that she mentions, it's very much aligned with that sort of relationship based selling. So when we think of like fire elements, they're much more direct sale, much more, hey, ask. If I get rejected 10 times, that's fine. The 11th one's going to say yes, and I can keep going. And that doesn't necessarily hurt me or anything else because I'm very good at saying no and drawing a boundary as well. But from that bonding side, that active listening, empathy, really customizing it, making it specific, and then making sure that we're transparent in there can really be a powerful thing. So I do want
I
to
think
touch.
real one
Go ahead.
last quick
Yeah,
thing on
yeah.
that. You nailed something that I think is a great reminder is that a no isn't a personal thing.
Mm.
right? And so we just because they say no to this offer you've created doesn't mean they're saying no to you or the relationship or anything else. And so we got to kind of remove that as a potential barrier or obstacle because I think that based on what you just said, I think that does hold some waters back.
Yeah, and think about it this way. If you're walking through a grocery store and you see four different types of deodorant and you pick the brand that you want, or maybe you switch brands and you try a different one, the other three don't get offended. They don't get offended because you didn't select them, because it is a personal choice of what products, where we spend our money and where we spend our energy. It's not something that we should feel guilty about or bad about if somebody says yes or says no to us, because here's my product, here's what I'm offering, here's the opportunity. If you think this is a great fit that's going to help you win, then let's do business together and let's close this deal and let's move forward. So I want to address, because you had brought it up, and I see Randy's comment in there. Two clients that said they wanted to start in June, and the calendar shows that it's July. When I think about this is one of those things where, on some level, step back and go, what is it? What is the actual barrier? Are they having an issue with, they don't have consensus? Is it a budget issue? Is it this? Is it that? If they're non-responsive, I have a very particular thing I like to send out. Are we giving up on this? And I just leave it there. Are we giving up on this? We had a great conversation. It seemed like we had some good value that we could offer you. I think that we are ready to move forward with this project. Are we moving forward, or are we giving up on this? And at that point in time, it really gives you that sort of binary of, I'm either going to say yes and close this deal, or yes, I'm going to give up on it. By the way, the human brain doesn't like to give up on things. So when you position it that way too, it makes it a lot more difficult. You're probably going to get more information out of that person. No, I'm not giving up on it. Here's the issue. Here's the barrier. Now we're not having to worry about the sale. We're really going to be focused on how do we solve that issue or what that barrier is. And that's where you can be creative with it. All right, let's put you on a payment plan. Let's get this started. And I'm not going to invoice you for 30 days, for 60 days, for 90 days, whatever it is, if it's a money thing or if it's a timing thing. Hey, here's my 5-step plan to get you started. You don't have to do anything except show up on X, Y, and Z date. So this is something that I think will possibly help you move that needle forward if you get into that stalled space. This is something, and thank you. I see Randy and Elisa both say, mind blown on that. It's something that I have found that, because at the point in time, I want them to say, yes, we are giving up on this. Perfect. I can clear that headspace and I'm moving on to the next person, not taking offense to it. But if they're not giving up on it, I need to know what it is that's stopping us from getting to the finish line. I think about it as football. Getting to the 10-yard line is great. Getting across the goal line is what we want. So don't
Oh,
stop at the
that's
10-yard line. Yeah. And Elizabeth commented above too. You need to take the personal aspect out of being told no, and that can feel hard. But remember, like I think Terry said it best. They're not rejecting you; they are rejecting a expense. They're rejecting a time. They're rejecting a priority. They're rejecting something. Even a product. Maybe it's not a fit for them, or they don't see the value of it. But like I said, there's 7 billion people in the world. There are people out there that are going to see the value of your product, your service, that are going to say yes, and then they're not going to take a whole bunch of your time, spend your energy and efforts there, and that's going to have a huge impact.
awesome. That's
So,
awesome. So go ahead.
no, I was going to say, we've spent a lot of time on the sales, and it's interesting because a lot of times marketing and sales is really conflated, and marketing oftentimes is bringing people into awareness, bringing them to that sort of first top level of the sales funnel. How would you think about, in terms of marketing, what are maybe some of the things that you would suggest in leveraging the elements as a process or as a system to be able to market effectively, Terry?
I like the idea of and I didn't do this until meeting behavioral elements is even though if you understand your client avatar and it goes across all four elements, right? And a lot of times it does, right? The fire needs food just like earth needs food, or whatever the case may be. Um, I like the idea of being very intentional and very specific about your message and speaking to one audience in a post. Now, you could have four completely different posts that effectively say the same thing, but are going to hit each of their triggers differently, right? If you're speaking to fire, you're going to want to talk about helping them win. If you're speaking to water, you're going to want to talk about helping them bond. If you're talking to air, you're going to want to help them create or innovate, or, tickle their curiosity a little bit. And if you're talking about to earth, it's going to be something that's going to help them protect or shield or defend. And so using that knowledge to create individual messaging, I think is really, really valuable. Or using that knowledge and creating longer form posts that speak to each one of those things in turn, I think can be valuable as well. Although, to be totally fair, I have not seen that be as valuable yet. That doesn't mean I'm good at it. That just means I haven't seen the return yet.
Well, and I think that that's kind of the interesting thing, right? Is if we think about the four different elements, and we do think about, say, I'm going to create a long form post, and I've got all four elements that are sort of represented in that space. And maybe Jay the Fire is really only going to resonate with 25% of that post. Does that mean Jay is going to skim that? The rest of it doesn't really matter or anything else? Versus if you've got one that's just about, here's how Jay is going to win, here's how he's going to do this is how he's going to elevate, and I get 100% interest on that post, I'm probably more likely to kind of follow along with your journey or with your next message, because it really felt like it connected to me. And I think that that's where, we're thinking about how are we creating connections with the language we're using. Let me give you a quick example from
Love that.
our experience, right? From my experience, we did a work with a credit union, and one of their primary audience members was teachers, and we know that teachers tend to 78% of the teachers, and we got about 4,000 assessments. 78% of frontline school teachers tend to show water as their primary element. Now, if you've ever gotten the marketing message from a bank, from a credit card, from anybody else, sign up for this account and we'll put $300 into your pocket. Okay, what is that message? That message is targeted towards the drive to acquire. It's giving you money. And everybody thinks, oh, money is the important thing. We're going to give you money. We're going to give you money. Modifying that message towards their audience, which is more driven to bond, sign up for the account, and we're going to put $300 in your friend's bank account. That had a massive difference. It was something like the initial campaign showed something like 31% more opens with like 15% more signups and so on and so forth, all the way down that line. And it was a simple tweak. It was the exact same cost, it was the exact same expense. But the other value add there was, well, if your friend doesn't have an account, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to invite your friend to come and open an account. So now they're getting two accounts for the price of one, and it has an impact, right? So being able to position your product specifically that is going to meet the needs, or your marketing efforts that's going to resonate with the drives in an effective way. Think about like product care lines, right? Like for me, I want something that is going to be fast. I don't need to spend a lot of time on it or anything else like that. So any of those products where it's like six different, lotions, and six different lotions in one is way better to me than six different lotions that I would have to do in a morning routine. Give me the one and all. Does it matter if it's like this one is more effective and this one? I don't care. Just get me fast. If you're speaking to that, efficient, you're probably going to get my business. If you're speaking to, hey, you need to do all these steps and these details and remembers all these things, I'm probably not going to buy, because I know that in a week, I'm not going to do it. So if we're able to position some of that marketing that really resonates with those drives, it's going to have a better impact of you essentially getting attention and energy right out of the gate.
So I think that's super important, and I want to make sure because I feel like sometimes we tend to assume that the people that are in here already know everything about behavioral elements and understand the behaviors and know what's driving what, and so we throw out fire and everybody's like, "Oh, yay, drive to acquire." Um, and but I want to make sure that we break it down simply and clearly enough that whether we're talking marketing or sales, we can have these, someone can go, holy cow, that makes so much sense to me. So, Mr. Fire, do me a favor and the audience a favor as a whole, and tell us really not only what drives fire, but how we would recognize fire and how we might move fire into action. Can you
Sure.
do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, tell me how this is going to help me win. That's the biggest thing. What are you selling me that's going to help me win? That's going to help me overcome a challenge. That's going to help me solve something faster than I'm doing it right now. Like the technology that I get sold on all the time, I could care less about all the bells and whistles. Does this get me to the finish line faster? Does it get me to the finish line with less resource allocation? So I'm saving money or anything else like that. When we think about something like status, and there is an element of status there too, right? So, from a fire element, does this help elevate my position? Does this help me get to that higher level goal or that mastery? Now, that's strictly fire. Obviously, I have a lot of air element too. So sometimes I do like the innovative or the experience. And remember, we have all four of the elements. So that's going to speak to me first. And then, okay, is this new novel something out there that nobody's tried before? Is it something that I can modify or change or adapt to my needs even more so? That's also going to be attractive to me at my secondary element level.
Love that. I love that. So help you win, help you save time, help you save money, help you look better, help you do better, perform higher. Those are things that are really gonna speak to fire. Do we
Yeah.
miss one?
Nope. I'm looking at the chat here. And yes, Randy, we can connect everybody here. And by all means, if you guys want to share your LinkedIn on here or your Instagram, by all means, connect with each other and support each other. That's awesome. I love that. But we can also create different places for connections as well. So, to Francesca's point, yeah, am I going to be on a waiting list for a month? Is this going to take me a long time to get started? Or am I going to get to the finish line tomorrow, which is when I want to get to the finish line? Yep.
Right now, right?
Yep.
Make it fast, make it easy. I love that. And then in the same breath, right, when you're talking to them, the chit chat in the hey, we're gonna build some pleasantries and talk about the weather. Bullshit. They don't want that, right? They got about 5 seconds worth of time for the niceties, right? Move to help them win. So
Somebody
love that.
somebody asked me for a 30-minute sales meeting yesterday, and it was something that was interesting to me, and I was like, can you do it in 10? If you can't sell me on this in 10, we probably don't have any business talking to each other. So
Well, and I think this is a really important point because I think this is the difference between um, fire and earth have this same thing in common, and water and air don't have it in common. Fire and earth have a pretty good idea what true north looks like as to where they're going. So their ability to say yes is usually pretty quick. If it aligns to what they're trying to do, they're going to be in. Water is going to think it over for far too long, and air is going to create 19 different ways as that it could work if I do it this way or that way. And so they're going to take a longer time to make a decision too. Fire is like, yes, right now. I think Earth is similar to that if you give them enough information.
And that's the key with the earth element. They're going to have a checklist already built in their head. Am I meeting all of these different things that have to be met in order to pull the trigger and go forward? They've already made the decision whether they have the budget or this or that or the other thing. Does it fit within the budget? Check. Yes. Does it have these features? Check. Yes. Does it have this? Check. Yes. No. Okay, well, that was a non-negotiable. We're going in a different direction. If it's a yes on all their checklist items, they're probably going to pull the trigger moderately quickly.
Yes. Right. But you're right. After going through the checklist, which, oh, by the way, as the salesperson, as the marketer, it's your job to figure out what's on their specific checklist. And you know what? If you ask, they're gonna tell you. Because, but you got to do it in a hurry. They don't like chit chat any more than fire.
That's right.
So I love that. I love that. So from an air perspective, and I have a perspective on air. Um, I want to talk about ideas. I want to talk about things that don't exist. I want to talk about how do we solve problems? How do we move into action? How do we innovate? How do we take this and make it better than it was? And so if you can help me see a vision for that, and oh, by the way, it can be literal air that you're selling, right? You don't even have to show me a thing. If you can paint a picture that I want to see myself in, I'm jumping, right? But the moment that I don't sense that you can do that, you're going to get met with all kinds of resistance, objections, roadblocks. And maybe it's again, maybe it's because my water is pretty high too, but I have a little bit of trust issue, and I will give you all the trust you need before you've earned an ounce of it.
Hmm.
But the minute you blow it, God, you're going to have to work 16 times harder to get it back than you would have just walking in the room.
Certainly. So, and that water side of the thing is when we think about it is the relationship. If you're selling to water or if you're looking at water, the water is going to look for number one, they're going to look to make sure how is this not only going to impact myself, but how is it going to impact the people around me? Am I spending money on myself unnecessarily when I could be spending that money on my family, on my team, on whomever else? They're also going to be looking for consensus. They're going to want social proof on some level of show me other people like me that this has worked for or that I've seen, and so on and so forth. That's a really powerful way to kind of create that connection. Look at all these people that are in your tribe that you're doing that. And if you can solve that problem for the tribe, it's a powerful way for you to make that connection with water. So I see some people sharing in the chat. I love this. If you want to share your LinkedIn and connect with each other, do that. And I see some agreement here. So Terry, any final thoughts as we round out? We are hitting our end of our time here today. Any final thoughts to leave our audience with in terms of sales and marketing behavioral elements?
I think is as much as behavioral elements is based on science, and it is, right? There's a whole pile of it that backs all of the things that we talk about. I think it's really important to realize that marketing in particular and relationship building as well are both an art. And the reality is, when it comes to art, sometimes it gets a little messy. You have to show up, you have to do the things, you have to go through the trial and error and see what actually works for you, and then test that all over again, because just because it worked once doesn't mean it's going to keep working. But guys, play, right? Have fun with this. This is useful information if you apply it.
Love that, Terry. My final comment before we close up here today is whatever your personal element is, whatever your personal selling style is, remember that we're going to have a bias. So mine is a fire. I'm going to walk in with the bias to sell like a fire, but my audience is probably maybe not a fire. Maybe I need to think about how I'm going to come across. If I come in a direct sales, but my audience is water and earth, which, as I sell to HR representatives or trainers, it's going to be high water, high air, high earth. I need to know that if I come in with my style because that's what's comfortable for me, it may not be comfortable for the person that's sitting across from me. So make sure that you're checking your language, how you're communicating, and what value you're offering your audience to make sure it fits within their persona and not necessarily the bias of your own persona. And if you do that, you're going to see an increase in your sales and your marketing because you're going to be connecting with people at a different level. So, thank you to everyone who is here with us today and spending the time with us. Next month, we've got a really fun topic that we're going to be exploring. We're going to be making some assessments about some very, very popular TV characters, which we don't know, but we're going to analyze and walk through how would we evaluate somebody who we don't know their profile, and how would we try to create something to better understand them. So we're going to talk through this. There's no great answers here. It's just going to be some discussion. So we'd love to see you there and to get your feedback and thoughts. But thank you again for joining us. And I see a lot of thank yous in there. So look forward to seeing you next month. And until then, be well. Thanks, everyone.